Welcome to another episode of The Impact of AI, sponsored by AI Time Journal. Each week, we explore how AI and cognitive technologies impact us daily, both professionally and personally. For those of you whom I've not met yet, my name is Melissa Drew, and I'm your host for this week's podcast. This week, we have a fellow IBMer. I know that's very special for some of those. I am an employee of IBM, but I have not had the luxury of inviting any of my fellow IBMers. And today, Heather, you are my first. Heather Johnston is a data scientist manager at IBM, where she integrates machine learning models into every stage of the marketing journey for web personalization to performance measurement. Now, this is going to be really interesting because we've talked a lot about how AI impacts us in our lives professionally, but we've never dug down deep into specifically how AI is being used in marketing. So this is going to be a real treat for us. Heather's been at IBM for nearly 15 years. And prior to that, she was a math professor at Rutgers, UMass, and Vassar. And what's most interesting is that Heather started with a bachelor's degree in mathematics and then ended up going into a PhD with mathematics before she decided to turn her life over to data science. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So the first question is always the same. We want to talk about your journey. Typically, it has been rare that we find somebody that actually starts their journey in one area and continues with that journey until where we see you are today. And I think you are one of those individuals that fits into that area because you started in math. You even went so far to get a doctorate in math, and you went and started as a professor in math for 4 years before you shifted over to IBM, where you started in the data science piece. So I know there's a really good story there, and we'd love to hear it.
Oh, thank you so much. So when I was growing up, I decided that I wanted to be, a doctor like my dad. He had a PhD in chemistry.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, what field I wanted to go into. So I went to MIT and I tried out a bunch of different things. I liked physics. I tried like different kinds of engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. And I ended up right back where I probably would have guessed in the first place, as a math major.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it. I was getting a PhD in math. I went off to the University of Chicago, and I got my PhD, where there weren't a lot of women in math. So it was, there were, like, 10, 15% of the students
Mm-hmm.
in the math department at that point in time were women. So it was pretty exciting to do that. And then, what does anybody do with a math PhD? I went on to be a math professor. So I was at Rutgers and UMass and Vassar. I was even tenure track at Vassar, had an NSF grant. Everything like on the outside looked like it was going well. But I just wasn't happy. So I decided it was time for a change. And I went back to get my MBA. That was the big key to success for me in changing my career. I think that if I had just quit my job and gone on a job search, it would have been really challenging for me. But that getting the MBA was a good pivot, and it made it really easy for me to first understand what my options were, and that's where I met marketing, was while I was getting my MBA.
And from there, you decided IBM.
Yes. So I was able to, find a couple of different opportunities in marketing analytics. That's what we called it back then. So marketing analytics was a very popular field at the time, where there were a lot of, opportunities to go into the business world and help them by predicting the future, in terms of, who is most likely to buy, given what they've purchased before, what should we sell them next? And so, I found that marketing was the best place for me. And I joined IBM for, nearly 15 years ago.
Yeah, 2007. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that actually segues into really the next question here is, so now let's fast forward to today, which is still focusing on data science and AI. What exactly does your role look like today compared to back in 2007 when the word data scientist wasn't even around?
Yeah, so things have changed so much. When I started, we were doing so much, by hand, that's now automated. And, so the biggest difference, one of the first projects I worked on was cross-sell, where we try to identify the next thing that someone's going to buy. I talk about peanut butter and jelly all the time, right?
Ooh, like that.
Look,
I love peanut butter and jelly.
Peanut butter and jelly, right? You bought peanut butter. Maybe you'd like some jelly to go with that, right?
Yeah.
So obviously IBM sells more complicated stuff, but
Or
that's
bananas or honey. I've
or
heard a lot of
bananas
different,
or honey,
I
right?
heard some
Yeah.
potato chips. Somebody told me that they actually put potato chips in their peanut butter and jelly to get the crunch. And my response back was, well, can't you just get crunchy peanut butter? Like, just get crunchy peanut butter.
But yeah, you'd be surprised what the combinations are.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so we had this machine learning model, back then, where we would, get the data out of IBM databases about who bought what. We'd identify which things were most frequently purchased together or sequentially. And then we would we would send the sellers an email so that they would know who was most likely to buy what. So yeah, we don't just like manually send an email anymore. That was a big change from when I first started to now. So we have a slightly different model that we're using at this point in time, that is set up to do the same sort of thing. We're using collaborative filtering to identify which products are most likely to go together. But it's all automated. The sellers have a dashboard that they can go to, if we're using it for sales. In marketing, we have marketing automation tools that we can feed the data into. So we're not just sending somebody an email with a spreadsheet. The technology has changed quite a bit.
So you mentioned a couple things, the word automated, but then you also talked about you feeding data into these platforms. How much data do you collect? I mean, do you know how many data sources you typically have or that you touch?
I mean, I worked on one project where we had over a dozen different databases feeding into the system. So there's many different sources of data. And in some of our projects, there's millions and millions of rows. So one of my projects, there's 400 million rows of data that we're working with to build the model. It's a lot more data now than it was back then when I started.
And the math background is really supporting you in the development of those algorithms and those models?
Yeah, so I mean, what I did as a mathematician, wasn't, data like directly related to data science. I was a pure mathematician, theoretical. It was very, very theoretical. But as over the time that I was in school and teaching, I did learn some probability and statistics, and then I learned more on the job. I remember when, I applied to IBM, they asked me, which do you prefer, SPSS or SAS? And I just looked at them and I said, oh, they're both great. right? It's like I never used either of these
Love
tools.
it. Great.
But now everybody uses tools like Python and R. It's a lot more open source these days. So
Do you guys within your team, because I talk to a lot of startups and a lot of companies, and they all have these programs where it tries to automate the development of the AI models. Because you can create them, or you can now they're saying you can buy our tools. And so what do we do internally? Do we build our own models? Do we use some of our own tools to try to automate the development of the models? What does that look like now?
yeah, so my team is not currently using any auto ML. I
Okay.
think that's very interesting. Every time I see that, I think, wow, I
Yeah.
wonder, if my team could save a lot of time by using these auto ML tools. But in general, when we're building something that we're going to put into production like this, where the data flows into the model,
Hmm.
and then it flows from there directly into the marketing automation system. It tends to be a really complicated model, and so it's the sort of thing where we wouldn't trust it to auto ML. I feel like that's for things that are a little bit simpler. So
Got it.
something simpler I would trust. If I wanted to build a lot of really simple models, then I would look to see what auto ML could do for me. Or if I didn't have any data scientists, right? So I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
I have a team of 20 data scientists,
Mm.
working with me, and so I'm using their skills to the best of my ability, and it's great to see what they can do.
You mentioned a complicated model. What's your definition of complicated?
So it's there are different ways in which the models can be complicated. So
Mhm.
one is the number of variables. If we have lots and lots of different sources of data, then we can end up with many different variables. A lot of times we have different levels of variables. So IBM's a B2B company, so we might have what we call firmographic data about the company, things like how big is the company, what industry is it in. We might have revenue data about the company.
Mhm.
We might have sales data about the company, which says when they bought what, as opposed to when they made the decision to purchase, as opposed to when the revenue came
Right.
in. We might have, and then, that's just company level data, right? We might also have individual level data. When did the user visit our website? What were they interested in when they were visiting our
Mhm.
website? How did they respond to previous marketing that we interacted with them? Maybe we sent them an email, maybe we, you know, sent them a display ad, right? If we have that information about the individual, that's helpful as well. And then we also have information about the specific interaction, right? So if someone's visiting our website, we have information about that specific visit to our website, as well as the history of all that individual's visits to our website. So that's a lot of different variables.
Yeah.
And then we also, we might have, many rows of data, like I said before, with like 400 million rows of data as one of my larger data sets. And that's just the input data being complicated.
You use the phrase individual and individualize in that explanation. And I know that, within the industry, we all talk about, or at least the industry is talking about hyper personalization. And
Yeah, so
they're
personalization. Yeah.
yeah, and they're talking about it a lot from, let's say, the online e-commerce community. But I think what I'm hearing in your response is that you're also thinking of hyper personalization not from a business to consumer perspective, but you're looking at it in a different way. Can you maybe
Yeah.
shed a little bit more
So
light on that?
So we have different levels of personalization. Sometimes it's at the company level. So what I was talking about with the cross-sell models, peanut butter and jelly, right? That's typically at the company level. So we identify what a company has bought and we personalize. So sometimes it's for the seller and sometimes it's personalized marketing. We call it account-based marketing for that specific account. We realize that they might want to buy jelly and because they bought peanut butter, and we'll send them some marketing materials about the thing that they might want to purchase next. We also, though, do it at the individual level. So especially around, sending email or visiting our website. We have paid media where we're targeting, a lot of times we're targeting audiences, we call them, right? Groups of individuals. But one of the things we're working on is being able to target a specific individual in terms of how can we personalize their marketing journey by giving them the right content at the right time for that individual based on everything we know about them in terms of their marketing interactions with IBM.
Yeah, I've seen a couple studies where they've said that consumers, all these surveys and studies that have come out have noted that consumers, any consumer, is more keen on receiving something that's individualized to them from a marketing experience, and as a result would respond better and probably increase their brand loyalty versus just getting those same static kind of, whether it's email marketing or however you're reaching to them. So I think it's interesting that, we continue to talk about hyper-personalization from an Amazon and a Netflix, but I don't think everyone realizes that there's all types of marketing, not just the ones that are, recommending your Netflix recommendations. But I think this is really good that we're kind of exploring in this particular topic.
Yeah. So one like little fact that I have stuck in my head was from years ago. I did some personalization of the IBM.com US homepage. We just personalized it by industry to see, how would that impact the effectiveness of the web page, and that personalization by industry doubled the click-through rates. It wasn't. We didn't even have data science in there. That was just a little test to see what would happen. We put the data science in later.
I think it's neat that, 15 years ago, probably even 10 years ago, marketing was a very creative, if you really want creative people to be in your marketing team. Now, talking to you, I think what I'm seeing is, well, you need creative and analytical type individuals in your marketing team because you're marrying the two together to still have the creativity, but to use the analytics to understand the effectiveness of how to distribute and communicate that creative.
Yeah. So, I mean, now in 2021, everyone needs to be able to use some analytics in marketing. So if you want to be a marketer, you can't ignore the power of analytics. It's very important for everyone.
So you've talked a little bit about where marketing was, before AI got involved. And I think we've really highlighted how AI has improved the marketing experience, both inside the company and how you're targeting your customers. Where do you see marketing going because AI is constantly changing. The technology is changing more rapidly than it ever was before. Is there something that you still would love to do in marketing that you just can't quite get there yet?
So one thing that we're working on right now is reinforcement learning. So I'm really excited about putting that into our marketing data science toolbox, right? It's one of the more advanced tools that we've been able to use, and it's something we haven't launched yet. So I'm excited to see how it works in action. The idea is that over time the model would improve itself, right? So that's what reinforcement learning does. It's AI. Yeah.
Oh, so okay. So now Okay, let's unpack that a little bit, because it's my understanding that we have cognitive technologies and then we have more of the artificial technologies. The cognitive technologies, you have somebody that develops the model, but you also need somebody that needs to come in and reinforce. I'm going to not use the word reinforce, but come in and make adjustments and maintain that model as new data comes in. Now, artificial intelligence is where we have somebody created the initial code, but due to the way it's been developed, for example, the driverless taxi, as new input is coming in through computer vision, the neural networks, they pull all that information together and they adjust automatically without that human intervention.
Yeah, that's what's really cool is it, a lot of times we, with machine learning, we build it, the machine learns, and it's done learning, that's all it learns.
Right.
But with the reinforcement learning, it can learn more over time.
Is this another type of like deep machine learning, or another type of, does it, how do I if I only have my two buckets?
Oh,
it sounds like
that's AI, because it
that
can learn,
sounds like you're truly in the
more.
artificial intelligence component.
Yes, that's artificial intelligence, because it can learn more over time.
So then, yeah, this would be new. I haven't heard of anybody using the AI, the true artificial intelligence technologies, and pulling them outside of applications like the driverless taxi,
yeah, like the driverless
the robot. I was on campus 2 years ago at can't remember, but I went to order lunch and they said they would deliver it to me. And I got a text message that it was outside, and I went outside and there was this little robot that looked like a dog.
Robot delivered your lunch? That's cool.
It was the coolest thing. This robot delivered my lunch. And when I got there, I punched in the code that was on my phone. It opened up and that was my lunch. And it was my lunch and it was curved. And then as soon as it closed, it just turned around and left. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, this is 2 years ago. I'm like, this is awesome. But that was my first interaction of true artificial technologies, because that I don't know what it was, the robot, that had so much information coming in all the time, new information, that it had to adjust without a human going in and intervening. But I've never heard of those reinforcement technologies being pulled into marketing or
right.
Other behind the scenes business applications. So yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So we're looking to personalize the journey that an individual has with IBM on their way to making a purchase. So they might start by seeing a display ad or doing a Google search, and then they come to our website. Maybe they go away and they come back to our website again another day. At some point, they might sign up for a webinar and we collect their information so that there's like this transfer trade, right? In order to see a webinar from IBM, they have to give us their information. So then we're able to send them an email with another link that might send them back to our website. We might retarget them with more display ads because if they came to our website from the display ad in the first place, the first one might have been very broad targeting. We're targeting an audience of people who share certain characteristics in terms of where they live or just demographics. And then, but later we can target them with a display ad very personally, like that exact person we want to. They came to our website, they signed up for a webinar, but they didn't buy anything. We can go back and find them again and show them more paid media to encourage, to drive them back to our website. And so all through this journey, I'm just trying to explain like what the problem is, right? At any stage in the journey, the question is, what is the right content for that specific individual so that we can show them the right content at the right time to maximize the chance that they'll actually buy something, right? That's our ultimate goal, is to maximize the revenue. So as part of that, how do we, this problem is, how do we show them the right content at the right time? One of our models that we're working on right now uses reinforcement learning in order to identify, what is the right content for that individual given where they are in their journey. And so it might be so it gets better over time. And what I'm saying is it makes an initial guess as to what is the right content for this individual at this time. And then, as over time, it gathers more data. Was that guess successful? Did that person actually buy something? And then based on what happens in terms of purchase or no purchase, so the model was in use, we can see whether or not they buy something, and we feed that back into the model. That's the reinforcement piece of reinforcement learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if I give back to you what I think I heard, it's throughout this journey in this customer experience, up in, before this reinforcement model, there's always been a touch point with a human to come in and slightly adjust it as more information come in.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the old way,
right.
What we had to do was, okay, it's time to update our model. Let's have a person come in and rebuild the model, right? But with this new way, the idea is that, in the future, we won't necessarily have to have a human come in and update the model. The machine itself can make the updates. That's what's so cool.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of where I think I've seen this before, and you let me know if I'm on the right track or not. Okay, so screensavers. I'm really simplifying this. When you were talking about this, I was thinking about the screensaver that automatically comes onto my computer, and then it asks me, do I like this picture, yes or no? And I have three options. I can either just let it ride and then wait for it to flip again, or I can specifically say I like it, or I can specifically say I don't like it. And then the more information I give it, I've noticed the more it changes the path of photos that it brings to me. Like for a while, I wasn't replying at all, and I kept getting kind of the same stuff I just never really liked. And then suddenly when I started engaging with it, it would adjust. And the more I've engaged, the more I'm getting, it started out really wide. And over 6 months, I've noticed that it's kind of narrowed a little bit more. So the number of times I actually like it is like 8 out of 10 times versus, 6 months ago, it was like 0 out of 10. I know that's really oversimplifying, but what you're talking about.
So it could
kind of concept.
Yeah, so it could be that the machine learning model itself is improving, or it could be in this case that the machine learning model is just gathering more information about you and the model itself isn't changing. I don't know for sure which one it is in that case, but our goal is, so we typically have data. So we gather a whole bunch of data, and we have data scientists build a machine learning model, and then it just sits. It's this static machine learning model for months. And then we have another data scientist go back. We say, oh, well, something about the data changed, or, we're not seeing as good performance as we used to see. We have to send a data scientist back in to update the model, and they repeat a lot of the processes that they went through, gathering data, building a predictive model, testing it, making sure that it works, redeploying it. And so with reinforcement learning, it's possible that you could have a model that's deployed and it's in production. And while this model is deployed and in production, it's updating itself. So the model is updating
That's
itself.
awesome.
That's really cool. The whole
Yeah.
idea of reinforcement learning is really cool.
I would think, after listening to this, knowing that marketing is at the very early stages of the sales cycle, it's kind of like the pre-sale cycle,
Yeah,
and it's very structured. That if, you mentioned earlier, everyone should be using some form of AI in marketing. So is it okay to say that if you're one of these Fortune 500 companies and you're not doing it, that perhaps you're not going to be as competitive as you really wanted to be, as all of the competitors around you are starting to marketing?
It's very important, that any successful company is using some sort of AI in marketing, because that's what everybody else is doing. And if they're not doing it, they're going to be missing out. They're going to have a hard time competing in the market today. Wow. So there's a lot of different types of machine learning and AI that are used in marketing. But there's different AI solutions at different points in the buyer journey. So we do a lot of personalization, starting with things like paid media and web visits, going through to later in the journey where they might be viewing a webinar. So we'll send if they've already, like, people who don't know IBM aren't going to open up an email from us, but if they've got to that stage, right, where they know us, they've watched a webinar, maybe they've downloaded a trial, they're using one of our SaaS trials. Once they've got that far into the journey, we have a lot more data that we can use to, personalize what we recommend to them. And we might invite them to an event. So that's one of the most costly things that IBM does, is we invite our customers to attend events. We're just getting back to maybe doing some of those in person. It's very exciting. And as we're planning some future in-person events, we want to be really sure that we invite the right people to the right event at the right time, because events cost a lot of money. We have to be very careful with how we spend our limited marketing dollars.
So as we start to wrap up, I'd love to ask you the question that we typically ask all of our guests is, do you have any insights and lessons learned that you can leave behind?
Ooh. So I think, right now, there's a lot of people who are, taking a look inside themselves. They're wondering, is this really the job that I want to have for the rest of my life? There's something about the pandemic that has inspired people to think about making change. And I'm a success story in terms of having a second career, right? So I was doing quite well as a math professor, but it just wasn't for me. So I went back to school, I started all over again, and here I am, almost 15 years later at IBM. So I think, don't be afraid to try something new is probably my biggest takeaway from my personal career journey, as I was able to, start that second career, change my mind after I got my PhD and started my first career as a math professor.
And it sounds like you're also advocating that marketing is a new industry that maybe folks hadn't thought about before, but with the combination of data and analytics and the creativity and the marketing, this sounds like this is a new, well, not new because it's been around, but there's going to be a new influx
of resources right now. Yeah, I agree with you. It's marketing, and the intersection of marketing and data science is something that is becoming more and more popular. And so, that worked out very well for me. If anyone's interested, I'm sure you can find some stuff to read out there on the internet about it. So it's a really cool place where these two fields came together.
Well, thank you very much for taking time out of the middle of your day to come and chat with me on our podcast.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.